Hi everybody, welcome back to another Read Aloud with Miss Junco. Let's go! I'm really excited today, as you can see, because today we're reading 2 chapters in our book because of Winn-Dixie. We're going to be reading chapters 3 and 4 today. Why? Because over the weekend I didn't post any videos, as you may have noticed, so that means today we're hitting the ground running. You're about to find out some information about Miss Opal's life that I know you did not see coming. And before we get started, I want us to go over the questions that we had in our last video. The first one was about Opal's relationship with the preacher. I asked you, who is the preacher? Right now in our book, you should know the preacher is Opal's father, right? I think their relationship as a reader, as I'm going through this journey with you guys, is that it's very respectful. Opal understands her father's job is a preacher. She understands that he has a lot of respect for what he does. He does it with heart. The preacher does his job with heart because that's what he is. He's passionate about that. So Opal sees him as somebody who, yes, she respects, but at the same time, she knows he's a busy man because of his job. Okay, our second question was, why does Opal refer to Winn-Dixie as a less fortunate instead of a dog when she introduces him to the preacher? I want you to think about any time that you've asked an adult for something that you might have really wanted, and we call this something with a P. We're trying to persuade them, right? We've said this before in class. We try to persuade the reader. That's what Opal is trying to do to her dad. She says, well, I found a less fortunate dad, because she knows how her dad feels about those less fortunate. So this is why I believe Opal introduces Winn-Dixie as a less fortunate, because she's trying to persuade the preacher into keeping him. Now I want you to give me one synonym for the word persuade. Remember, a synonym is a word that has the same meaning, but they are not spelled the same way. There are 2 different words that have the same meaning, but are not spelled the same way. So what is another word that means to persuade the reader? To persuade somebody. I'll give you a few moments. Okay, if you said to convince your reader, you are correct. Give yourself a pat on the back because you are right. To convince your reader also means to persuade your reader. Alright, without further ado, we're going to get into our chapters 3 and 4, and I will see you at the end of the video. Chapter 3. I started in on Winn-Dixie right away, trying to clean him up. First, I gave him a bath. I used the garden hose and some baby shampoo. He stood still for it, but I could tell he didn't like it. He looked insulted, and the whole time, he didn't show me his teeth or wag his tail once. After he was all washed and dried, I brushed him good. I used my own hairbrush and worked real hard at all the knots and patches of fur stuck together. He didn't mind being brushed. He wiggled his back like it felt pretty good. The whole time I was working on him, I was talking to him, and he listened. I told him how we were alike. See, I said, you don't have any family, and neither do I. I've got the preacher, of course, but I don't have a mama. I mean, I have one, but I don't know where she is. She left when I was 3 years old. I can't hardly remember her, and I bet you don't remember your mama much either. So we're almost like orphans. Winn-Dixie looked straight at me when I said that to him, like he was feeling relieved to finally have somebody understand his situation. I nodded my head at him and went on talking. I don't even have any friends, because I had to leave them all behind when we moved here from Whately. Whately's up in North Florida. Have you ever been to North Florida? Winn-Dixie looked down at the ground, like he was trying to remember if he had. You know what? I said. Ever since we moved here, I've been thinking about my mama extra hard, more than I ever did when I was in Whately. Winn-Dixie twitched his ears and raised his eyebrows. I think the preacher thinks about my mama all the time, too. He's still in love with her. I know that because I heard the ladies at the church in Whately's talking about him. They said he's still hoping she'll come back. But he doesn't tell me that. He won't talk to me about her at all. I want to know more about her, but I'm afraid to ask the preacher. I'm afraid he'll get mad at me. Winn-Dixie looked at me hard, like he was trying to say something. What? I said. He stared at me. You think I should make the preacher tell me about her? Winn-Dixie looked at me so hard he sneezed. I'll think about it, I said. When I was done working on him, Winn-Dixie looked a whole lot better. He still had his bald spots, but the fur he did have cleaned up nice. It was all shiny and soft. You could still see his ribs, but I intended to feed him good, and that would take care of that. I couldn't do anything about his crooked yellow teeth because he got into a sneezing fit every time I started brushing them with my toothbrush, and I finally had to give up. But for the most part, he looked a whole lot better, and so I took him into the trailer and showed him to the preacher. Daddy, I said. He said. He was working on a sermon and kind of muttering to himself. Daddy, I wanted to show you the new Winn-Dixie. The preacher put down his pencil and rubbed his nose, and finally he looked up. Well, he said, smiling real big at Winn-Dixie. Well, now, don't you look handsome? Winn-Dixie smiled back at the preacher. He went over and put his head in the preacher's lap. He smells nice, too, said the preacher. He rubbed Winn-Dixie's head and looked into his eyes. Daddy, I said, real quick before I lost all my nerve. I've been talking to Winn-Dixie. Is that right? The preacher said. He scratched Winn-Dixie's head. I've been talking to him, and he agreed with me that, since I'm 10 years old, you should tell me 10 things about my mama. Just 10 things, that's all. The preacher stopped rubbing Winn-Dixie's head and held real still. I could see him thinking about pulling his head back into his shell. 1 thing for each year I've been alive, I told him. Please? Winn-Dixie looked up at the preacher and kind of gave him a nudge with his nose. The preacher sighed. He said to Winn-Dixie, I should have guessed you were going to be trouble. Then he looked at me. Come on, Opal, he said. Sit down, and I will tell you 10 things about your mama. Chapter 4. 1, said the preacher. We were sitting on the couch, and Winn-Dixie was sitting between us. Winn-Dixie had already decided that he liked the couch a lot. 1, said the preacher again. Winn-Dixie looked at him kind of hard. Your mama was funny. She could make just about anybody laugh. 2, he said. She had red hair and freckles. Just like me, I said. Just like you, the preacher nodded. 3, she liked to plant things. She had a talent for it. She could stick a tire in the ground and grow a car. Winn-Dixie started chewing on his paw, and I tapped him on the head to make him stop. 4, said the preacher. She could run fast. If you were racing her, you couldn't ever let her get a head start, because she would beat you for sure. I'm that way too, I said. Back home in Whately, I raced Liam Fullerton and beat him, and he said it wasn't fair because boys and girls shouldn't race each other to begin with. I told him he was just a sore loser. The preacher nodded. He was quiet for a minute. I'm ready for number 5, I told him. 5, he said. She couldn't cook. She burned everything, including water. She had a hard time opening a can of beans. She couldn't make head nor tail of a piece of meat. 6, the preacher rubbed his nose and looked up at the ceiling. Winn-Dixie looked up too. Number 6 is that your mama loved a story. She would sit and listen to stories all day long. She loved to be told a story. She especially liked funny ones, stories that made her laugh. The preacher nodded his head like he was agreeing with himself. What's number 7? I asked. "Let's see," he said. She knew all the constellations, every planet in the nighttime sky, every last one of them. She could name them and point them out, and she never got tired of looking up at them. "Number 8, said the preacher, with his eyes closed, was that she hated being a preacher's wife. She said she just couldn't stand having the ladies at church judge what she was wearing and what she was cooking and how she was singing. She said it made her feel like a bug under a microscope." Winn-Dixie lay down on the couch. He put his nose in the preacher's lap and his tail in mine. 10, said the preacher. 9, I told him. 9, said the preacher. She drank. She drank beer and whiskey and wine. Sometimes she couldn't stop drinking, and that made me and your mama fight quite a bit. Number 10, he said with a long sigh. Number 10 is that your mama loved you. She loved you very much. But she left me, I told him. She left us, said the preacher softly. I could see him pulling his old turtle head back into his stupid turtle shell. She packed her bags and left us, and she didn't leave one thing behind. Okay, I said. I got up off the couch. Winn-Dixie hopped off too. Thank you for telling me, I said. I went right back to my room and wrote down all 10 things that the preacher had told me. I wrote them down just the way he said them to me so that I wouldn't forget them, and then I read them out loud to Winn-Dixie until I had them memorized. I wanted to know those 10 things inside and out. That way, if my mama ever came back, I could recognize her, and I would be able to grab her and hold on to her tight and not let her get away from me again. And that concludes chapters 3 and 4. Here's a reflective question for today. As Opal gives her new dog a bath, she tells him they are a lot alike. In what ways are Opal and her dog alike? Are they alike because they're both dogs? No. Obvious answer, right? She wants you to think a little deeper. Dig a little deeper into that hole and tell me how she tells you they are both alike. She even says it. You and I are quite alike in that way. We're like orphans, she says. But why does she say that? I want to know what you think. The last thing that I want to mention before I head out is today's comment shout out. Today's comment shout out, drum roll please, is Andres. He has been staying so active in our comments down below with not only Miss Junco, Miss Martinez, but also his other classmates. He's just saying, hey, it's Andres here. How are you? What are you doing? And he's also staying active in his Google Classroom. Please remember that you need to check Google Classroom every day for different assignments. And as always, I love you, I miss you, and I'll see you next time.